This is a special talk. This is the one that is most focused on a huge issue right here coming out of this moku, the Waianae moku, and it is about Waianae, the wahi, the history of militarism in this moku, and the future of militarism in this moku, which is none. So Kyle, we have Uncle Sparky Rodriguez, who everybody knows is a long time, I don't know how you, kia'i. He's a long time kia'i for Makua Valley. And of course, he's one of our beloved Aloha Aina Kupuna, and spent so much time also up on Mauna Kea, protecting our Mauna. So Mauna to Mauna, it's all about protecting our Aina. And then following Uncle Sparky will be another longtime Aloha Aina, Kyle Kajihiro over here, who is, I mean, I can't think of anybody else that carries more ike in terms of the history of militarism, the mechanics of militarism in Hawaii and the processes. And Kyle will be sharing about the lease issue, the lease that is set to expire in Makua, and how we are going to make sure that it's not renewed. And so without any further ado, we'll bring up Uncle Sparky. Mahalo. Are you okay standing, or do you want me to lower this?
I'll go ahead and stand. Okay, aloha, Sparky Rodriguez, malama makua. And this is kind of my PowerPoint on what we're exposed to every day. We live in a world that we pass by and we don't recognize a lot of things. So that's why I titled this right in front of our eyes. But if you can imagine Waianae 1,000 years, what was that like? So this is kind of the beginning. We have two huge calderas between us and Kauai that's underwater. And we don't necessarily see that or recognize that it's part of our creation. This is our actual visual of what it's like. Now, the big circle that's on the bottom side is the 80% of the caldera that makes up Waianae. So we're actually living on 20% of a dormant volcano. Over the years, the thousands of years, native endangered species, endangered now, they were not at one point, but this is part of our community that we don't see anymore. And because of the constant commercialization, the plantations, the ranches, and the militarization. In Hakipu, there was a Hawaiian Tale building was being built. And when they were digging for the foundation, they found a ahu. Below the ahu, they found the skeleton of a pua'a. Our modern day ahu pua'a markers are no longer ahu with the pua'a. It is a sign. So we've really lost a lot of the connections in how we define our aina and its use. This right here is my wife, Leandra. She's already passed in 2016, but our relationship was not very good. And we used Makua as a way to heal our relationship. This is a place where she called her home, and she was able to not only learn from the aina by being quiet and listening, but also by touching, feeling, cleaning, and being the malama that's required for us to connect. We don't really have that opportunity nowadays. It's really difficult in our life. This is some of the influences that we had. The road was not really a road, it was a railroad. Our alahele has been paved over. So we really don't have the sites and the access to the aina that we once had. This is what's taken it over. Militarization. From the late 20s, the military was using Makua. And in this slide, you can see that there's a church, there's some homes, and once World War II started, actually everybody was evicted, forced off the land. Kuleana land. Big X's or crosses were put on the roofs so that the pilots, as they flew in, would not destroy them. When the pilots landed, they said, we thought that was the target. So all the homes, including the church, was blown up. This right here is Amphibious Landing, and if you look really close, you might even recognize where that is. It's in Waianae. And there's many, many more landings that has happened on our coast. This right here is part of the missile tracking that they wanted to put in Ka'ena. Fortunately, they decided maybe not, because Waianae don't like it. Some of the activities in Mokua, you can see the valley and some of the training. But what happens is that when training is over, they leave their opala behind. They don't clean it up. On the far right top is the OBOD site, open burn, open detonation. So all the obsolete, dated munitions that was in Lu'ulu'ule would be taken there to be destroyed. And how they would do it is dig a hole. You can see in the bottom right, as although it's filled with water, they would put the bombs, the ordnance in there, pour diesel fuel or contaminated jet fuel, light it up, or put charges on it and blow it up. Problem is, that stuff doesn't just go up and go back down, it goes out. And in sections of Mokua, there is what is called cluster bomblets. Not supposed to be used on a live fire range where troops are, but they did in disposal, and it blew those bomblets out into the environment, into an area where there's a huge heiau complex that we cannot go into, they won't clean it, and we've requested with the Pentagon for a very long time. They still said no. On the left side is part of PKO when they came to Mokua, because Mokua was part of the efforts to return the land along with Koholave. On the right side is the graveyard. So a lot of the Hawaiians that were promised to get their land back after 6 months after the end of the war, that's how they got their land back. Problem is, as they were doing amphibious landings, a lot of the headstones have bullet holes in them. And all of the cultural sites in Mokua have bullet holes in them. Some of the contrasts, you can see there's a fence with a sign, danger, no hunting, unexploded ordnance since 1920, the late 20s. Every bullet is still there, becoming part of our environment, part of the water, part of the air, part of the plants. When there's a fire, it turns all into ash and it blows into our community, blows into the Aina. We end up, after our lawsuit and we were able to negotiate, we were able to participate in makahiki, which had not been done in over 100 years when we started over. Walter Kamana said as he was a child, he remembered the cowboys doing the procession with the makahiki flags. This is some of all the numbers you see there are all cultural sites that have been identified. Federal government loves to identify things with numbers. So it's really lost a lot of our identity and connection to the cultural sites. Walter Kamana on the bottom left showing us pretty much how to take care of the near shore Aina, which is all a result of what's up in Mauka. Endangered species again. This right here is the run-up of tidal waves that have hit Waianae. So we understand there's on the Big Island, where everybody knows that the Hilo was wiped out, but nobody explains what happened in Waianae. And some of the old-timers seen the tidal wave come in as they were going to school in the morning. And what happened is that each one of those colored images represent a year that it had the tidal wave. So 48, 52, 57, 1960, 1964, 2011. Not every community was impacted the same way. But we are in a coast. This right here is Kuleana Landmarkings. Now the problem that we're having with the Kuleana lands is the Army has been surveying the Kuleana lands in Makua to identify them because they claim all of them in fee. That means we don't have any rights to them at all. So either through presidential order or the state or the county or whoever was there forfeited either with a cash payment or at gunpoint. So they had no choice. They had to get out. So they were forced out of Makua. And the Kuleana lands are now being claimed in fee. More Kuleana lands. So if you get a chance, we have all of this stuff in our Malama Makua booth, so you get a chance to see if your names, your family names are linked there. Right here, you see the training objective impact. So they would get their howitzers and fire into this area. But you can see there's 2 Kuleana properties there. The problem that we have is that the kupuna said it wasn't a flat area, which is now the training area. It was little rolling hills, and people lived there. But there was also something that was similar to Waikiki, the 7 wizard stones is what they called them. They bulldozed them off the site into the ravine, so they don't exist anymore. So a lot of the destruction from militarization as well as construction efforts have really taken these sites away from us. We don't have that ability to connect with them anymore. Again, more of their training, all the different weaponry. 64 is when the presidential Lyndon Johnson executive order to take some of the land. So a lot of it is still in state ownership, some of it is in federal, and there's even a few parcels in city and county. Part of Makua was also when Israel's ashes was scattered. So they said it was only a few thousand people there. I don't think so. I think maybe 20,000 is what my thought was. The roads were blocked. All the truckers from the island was on the road going both ways, and the roads were blocked from here to Honokaihale. We have a section we call the Ki'i Pohaku, Pohaku Ki'i. Huge sandstone and all of the different figures there. Aiha'a, Moku-moku-san, you have the dogs, and there's even some petroglyphs that are lizard or mo'o, dogs throughout Makua. This is some of the military impact. So when they do training, their objective is to get to their site, blow it up, shoot it up, kill the enemy. What Hawaii is being known as is a purveyor of death. We're doing training here to kill somebody somewhere else. Makua, based on what Malama Makua's new mission is the Pico of Peace. We no longer want them to be training at all. So it changes the dynamic from war, training, to peace. We want peace for all of Waianae. I don't want to rest in peace. I want to live in peace. This is some of the bombs that were found. A 1,000-pound bomb, the guy in the middle, EOD guy standing next to a 1,000-pound bomb. At our tent, I have a remnant of the detonated bomb. Very heavy, very sharp. Death is part of its job. It's not built and made for any other reason other than killing. My wife is sitting in the crater that it created, 12 feet deep and about 30 wide. We were a mile away when they detonated it across the valley in Makua, and we felt the concussion that traveled across. We could see it in the grass as they traveled across, and when it hit us, it was amazing. It was scary. It was upsetting that they've been doing this when the lease ends for 100 years. Late 20s to 2029. 100 years. $1. And they don't even have to clean it up. All they got to do is leave. And this is what they've done, or give it to another agency. Puerto Rico, they gave it to Fish and Wildlife. They put a fence, bombs right there next to the road. Unexploded. Fires, another thing. So the endangered species that I had up there earlier would be burnt. And it started off on the floor of the valley, and then it kept on burning and burning and burning. They cannot fight a fire on a live fire range. They got to wait till it burns and burns out, because the ordnance would explode. This is what the valley looks like when the fires are not controlled. The entire valley, Kahanaiki side and part of Makua, toast all the way from sea level to the peaks and over. This is the Heiau, Ukanipo. You can see that the rocks there, the pohaku, looked like imu rocks. They were all rainbow colored because of the heat. Ivanhoe Naivi was showing us where the water was. We didn't know, because when they put the roads in, fire break roads, they pushed all of the opala into the spring and into the wells, covered them up. So with this photo, it gave us some help in finding them again. So we found them, they're available, and that's part of it. Bottom right image is at the graveyard, and you can see that headstone is broken. That's from a bullet hole. Cultural sites, some of the things that we don't have access to. Ulumaika, all of the remnants are all in a box in Schofield on a shelf. We're moving into about the 20-year of peace for Makua. This is our 10 years of peace celebration. The Army they hate it when we celebrate peace for Makua. 10 years, we did 15 years, we're getting ready to do 20 years of peace. So I'm gonna pass this off to Kyle. I'm not sure how we're gonna do this, but I'm gonna leave it all up to you all.
Aloha kako, everyone. Mahalo for Waihona Aloha Aina for putting this event on. And it's an honor to be here and celebrating with all of you, La Kūʻokoʻa. In honor of that, I just wanted to sort of dedicate the theme of deoccupy Hawaii is also to demilitarize Hawaii, because the militarization is part of the fundamental contradiction that exists here, right? That the United States occupies us for military and strategic purposes. So I'm gonna have to speed through my slides, but I just want to make a few points. We're all familiar with 1893, the overthrow, 1897, the Kūʻokoʻa petitions, so there was no treaty of annexation, right? No annexation. But, oh, what happened? But we know that the United States was interested in acquiring Pu'uloa, or Pearl Harbor. So this map from 1872 shows how detailed, they were interested in these wetlands and the local the fish ponds. At the same time that this was being mapped, General Schofield comes to Hawaii disguised as a tourist, but he's writing secret dispatches back. He says, it is the key to the Central Pacific Ocean. It is valueless to them, to Native Hawaiians, because they cannot use it, but it's more valuable to the United States than anything else the islands have to give. And you can see what he's talking about when he says that it's valueless. Oh. Right. This map shows the red areas where all the former fish ponds were. A few blue dots show where there's currently fish ponds available. So this is what they're deeming as valueless. But the military just sees a port where they can station their ships, coal them, and project power across the Pacific. And this is the objective, right, is to rule the world, basically. By controlling Hawaii, they can extend control over the world. So I'm going to speed through this. Hawaii is now the headquarters of the United States Indo-Pacific Command, where that flag is over in Halava Heights. But its area of responsibility, as you can see, goes from the west coast of North America to the central Indian Ocean, from Alaska all the way to, and includes the entire continent of Antarctica within its area of responsibility. So the majority of the surface of the planet and most of the world's population falls within the Indo-Pacific Command. And one thing about the metaphor I want to invoke is what Kūleana talks about, this monstrous he'e of the military occupying our region, and Hawaii would be its head. But the thing about he'e is that they're shapeshifters, right? They can camouflage. So if you look at this map of foreign military bases, Hawaii doesn't even show up on there because scholars who look at this stuff don't count us as a foreign site. So this is where Hawaii flips in and out of being seen and not seen as a problem of empire, right? So the brains of the he'e, the eyes, the ears, the excrement, what was once a food basket is now a giant toxic site. The destruction, the desecrations, the transformation of people from Hawaiian into Americans. The military was a big part of that, right? The whole idea of training people to think a certain way, to identify a certain way. Kamehameha Schools was the first, junior ROTC, McKinley High School the second, Tokyo High, right? So to turn Hawaiians and Japanese into Americans was part of this program. The social impacts, we see it on this coast, especially the houselessness, right? That's landlessness in Hawaiian homeland. And the housing subsidies underwrite military being able to live in homes, but it also means the local residents are outcompeted, right? And it's contributing to the high cost of living. The tentacles reach out across the Pacific, affect many parts, and when tentacles are cut off, they grow back. So we have to deal with the problem here. Kaho'olawe was a resurgence, a site of kipuka, right? It was a place of cultural and political resurgence. Makua Valley, as Uncle Sparky just explained, was also part of that struggle, and it continues. Mauna Kea is now another kipuka aloha aina, another space of aloha aina that's growing. But right at the foothills of where Mauna Kea is Pohakuloa. And this is also a site of ongoing desecration, ongoing struggle. And this is a great video if you have a chance to look at it. Pohakuloa, Now That You Know, Do You Care? OHA produced this a few years back. But I want to jump ahead to talk about some new data that just come out. The Indo-Pacific Command recently released what's called the Hawaii Military Land Use Master Plan, HMLUMP. Okay, the last one it did was in 1995. So in the aftermath of PKO stopping the bombing on Kaho'olawe, as the Hawaiian sovereignty movement was peaking, commemorating the 100th anniversary of the overthrow, there was the end of the Cold War and lands were starting to be returned. They did a study to try to preserve what lands the military had in Hawaii. And that was the first HMLUMP plan in 1995. This is the second one that just came out. It's not publicly available, only I think the legislators got it and I got a hold of one. And so this is some data that I'm going to share with you. So they're talking about 221,000 acres of land controlled by the military. About 68% of that are Hawaiian land trusts, government and crown lands. There's also these leases. So this was in the revelation for me. I knew about these top four the Army leases that we talked about, Pohakuloa, Kahuku, Kawailoa, and Makua. But all of these other ones we were not aware of. So the Navy has a bunch of land on Kauai. The Air Force has land on Kauai, Maui, and Oahu. And so I'm going to show you some maps to indicate where they are. So here you can see the Army leases. Pohakuloa, about 20-something thousand acres, 22,000 acres. On Oahu, you have the Kahuku training area, about 1,000 acres. Kawailoa, about 4,000 acres, and Makua, about 780, 800 acres. So the lower part of Makua Valley is leased. So that means these are Hawaiian trust lands, the former government crown lands, held by the state, but leased to the Army for $1 for 65 years at each of these leases, right? Here's the Navy lands on Kauai. So you can see there's almost like almost 8,000 acres of ocean space that they're leasing. This huge area, about 500 acres of easement that they're using to, this is where the GMO agro crops are as a buffer for the military base. But there's also the dark blue are leased lands. And then the Air Force site. So at the end of the road at Kaena Point, those golf balls are some of the same leases, $1 for 65 years. Yeah? So we haven't heard any word about doing an environmental study for renewal of those leases. The Army has undertaken an EIS for both the Pohakuloa lease, so that's about 1 year into it, and we're expecting a draft environmental impact statement to be released anytime now. And they just begun the process for the Oahu leases, so that's going to be maybe within a few months we'll see a draft EIS. Just to give you an idea of what's at stake, so here's a table that shows you how much land the military claims in fee, how much is considered ceded lands, trust lands, and how much of it is leased, and then others would be like easements and private partnerships and so forth. But if you look at these two columns, they total about 151,000 acres of Hawaiian trust lands that are currently used by the military. So the majority of military land holdings come out of the stolen lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom. I think that's a key point to keep in mind, what's at stake. And they want to renew these leases. This is a map of this is what the report lays out as their current military sites on Oahu. And then also what's on Hawaii Island. And you can see the red hatched areas indicate the leased lands, the $1 for 65 years that the Army wants to renew for another 65 years. So those come due in 2029. We have, 8 years now to try to stop them and get these lands cleaned up. They're going to fight really hard for this because this is what they need in order to do their other training. The larger part of Pohakuloa is also Hawaiian trust lands, but it's where the impact range is. So this is the most hazardous area, right? And they haven't done adequate environmental cultural studies to know even what they're damaging in that area. So these are all what's at stake in these lands. Again, $1 for 65 years. They're doing the EIS for Hawaii Island and Oahu Island. And you can see the lower part of the valley. Those little areas that are in green at the lower part, that's kind of embedded within the yellow, those are the Kuleana lands that were taken through eminent domain. So the Army claims those in fee. These would be the family lands where people were evicted from. But the rest of that yellow is lands that are trust lands that are leased for $1, 65 years. So there is the website for the Army lease retention environmental impact statement. And there's now a cultural impact assessment underway, which is part of the state law that requires them to do a cultural impact assessment. So if you have knowledge about cultural sites, cultural practices associated with Kahuku, Po'amoho, or Makua, you can do this survey, or you could just submit your comments directly to the consultant that's putting this report together. But also, Malama Makua is doing its own environmental and cultural impact statement, a community-driven plan for the future of Makua. So if you go to the tent, I think there's a survey there, and we're compiling those to put together our own report that will be like a parallel report to what they're doing for the Army, right? Expressing the community's vision. The other thing I want to just bring in, because this is also in the news lately, is the Red Hill fuel tanks. The Navy, during World War II, the Navy built 20 giant underground fuel tanks in Red Hill, in Kapukaki, which is on that when you're going over the freeway, Mauna Loa Freeway from Honolulu into Aiea, you're driving over this ridge. Inside of that ridge is 20 of these giant tanks, 250 feet tall, 100 feet in diameter. They hold 12 point something million gallons each, so about 200 million gallons in capacity, sitting 100 feet above the aquifer that supplies water for Honolulu. So about 400,000 people drink out of this aquifer, serving the area from Wanaloa all the way to Hawaii Kai, right? A quarter of the water for that district comes out of this aquifer. So a catastrophic spill would be disastrous, and they're projecting that there's about an 80% chance of a major spill within 5 years, and a 96% chance of a major spill within 10 years. And so we've been calling for closure of the tanks. So we have a coalition called the Oahu Water Protectors, affirming water is life, calling the Red Hill tanks a threat and that they need to be closed, and demanding more urgent action from all levels of government officials, from the local, county level, state, to the federal, right? And presidential and the Pentagon and so forth. So we've had some actions recently. There is a fact sheet that's floating around. Oh, we have some over here that Ann Wright is holding up, so please grab one. These will take you to a sign up for staying posted on this, and also the coalition statement that it's a little bit longer than I just showed you, but you can endorse the statement. That would be great. It will build our list to show that there's strong support for protecting water on Oahu. So that's all I have. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, happy to entertain them.